My name is Claire Morgan, and I should have known that peaceful winter nights in Denver were too good to last. The silence was almost sacred at 2 in the morning, the kind of deep, snow-muffled quiet that makes you believe the world has paused just for you. My small apartment felt like a cocoon, warm, yellow light from my reading lamp pooling across the thriller novel I'd fallen asleep reading. The heating system hummed its gentle lullaby, and outside, fresh powder painted everything pristine white under the amber streetlights. Then came the pounding. Not a polite knock. Not even an urgent knock. This was desperate, frantic, the sound of someone's fist hammering against wood like their life depended on it. Each impact sent a jolt through my chest, yanking me from sleep so violently that my book tumbled to the floor with a sharp crack. "Claire, Claire, please." The voice was muffled but unmistakably familiar, cracked with desperation and something else pain. I stumbled toward the door, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood, fumbling for the porch light switch. Through the peephole, all I could see was a dark shape hunched against my doorframe, but I knew that silhouette even in shadow. "Julia," I whispered, my fingers already working the deadbolt. When I pulled the door open, the December air hit me like a slap, but the sight before me froze me more than any Colorado winter ever could. My sister barely stood in my doorway, her left arm cradled protectively around a small figure in a wheelchair. Julia's face was a map of fresh bruises, purple blooms across her cheekbone, her lips split and swollen. Her dark hair, usually perfectly styled even at the grocery store, hung in tangled strings around her shoulders, but it was her eyes that stopped my breath wild. Darting, the look of a cornered animal that had just escaped something terrible. In her arms, 9-year-old Sophie sat wrapped in a thin pink blanket, her small hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. My niece's cerebral palsy meant she couldn't run from whatever had put that terror in both their faces, and the helplessness in her wide blue eyes made my stomach clench. "Oh my God, Julia!" I started forward, but she was already collapsing. Her knees buckled, and I lunged to catch her before she could fall completely, my arms wrapping around both her and Sophie. The three of us became a tangle of limbs and wheels and terror right there on my threshold, Julia's weight heavier than I expected, her breathing shallow and quick. "Get us inside," she whispered against my ear, her voice barely audible. "Please, Claire. He might follow." I maneuvered them through the doorway, Julia leaning heavily on me while I guided Sophie's wheelchair over the threshold. The contrast was stark from the bitter night air into my warm, safe apartment, but the fear followed them in like a living thing. Julia collapsed onto my couch immediately, her whole body shaking. Sophie remained in her wheelchair beside her, and I noticed she was clutching something in her small fist, a tarnished silver bracelet that looked familiar, though I couldn't place it. "Julia, what happened? Who did this to you?" I knelt beside the couch, studying the damage to her face more clearly under my living room lights. These weren't accidental injuries. Someone had done this deliberately, methodically. Before she could answer, my phone buzzed on the coffee table where I'd left it charging. The screen lit up with a text notification, and my mother's name appeared. My blood turned to ice water as I read the message. "Don't help that cripple. She's a traitor." I stared at the screen, reading it twice, 3 times, the words not making sense. Then I looked up at Julia, who had seen my expression change. "She knows we're here," Julia whispered, fresh tears cutting tracks down her bruised cheeks. "Claire, this isn't just about Mark anymore. It's about all of them." The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but one thing was crystal clear. My sister and niece had fled something so terrible that even our own mother, their own mother, was taking the other side. As I looked at Sophie, still gripping that silver bracelet like a lifeline, still watching me with those trusting eyes, I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. This wasn't just family drama. This was war. and they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives by bringing it to my door. I rushed to my bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit I kept under the sink, a habit from my IT job where paper cuts and cable burns were occupational hazards, though nothing had prepared me for this. When I returned, Julia was trying to clean Sophie's face with the edge of her sleeve, her movements gentle despite her own injuries. "Let me," I said, kneeling beside them with antiseptic wipes and bandages. As I dabbed at a small cut on Julia's temple, I caught Sophie watching me with those impossibly blue eyes, eyes that had seen too much for a 9-year-old. "Are we safe here? Aunt Claire?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper, but it hit me like a physical blow. The fact that a child had to ask that question made my hands shake with rage. "Yes, sweetheart, you're safe here," I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure what we were safe from yet. Julia winced as I cleaned the worst of her wounds, but she didn't complain. Instead, she started talking, her voice hollow and distant, like she was recounting someone else's nightmare. "It started getting bad about 6 months ago," she began, her fingers absently stroking Sophie's hair. "Mark. He lost his job at the construction company, started drinking more. At first, it was just yelling, throwing things. I thought it would pass. I continued working on her cuts, but my attention was entirely on her words. Mark Holloway, Julia's ex-husband, who'd somehow wormed his way back into their lives after their divorce 2 years ago. I'd never liked him, but I'd kept my mouth shut for Julia's sake. Last week, he started asking about Sophie's disability benefits, how much we get, where the money goes. I told him it was none of his business that money is for Sophie's medical expenses, her special equipment, her therapy. Julia's voice cracked. He said I was being selfish, that if we were going to be a family again, everything should be shared. Sophie shifted in her wheelchair, her small hand still clutching that silver bracelet. Now I remembered where I'd seen it. It had been our grandmother's, passed down to Julia when Grandma died. But why was Sophie holding on to it like her life depended on it? Tonight was the breaking point, Julia continued, her eyes staring past me into some terrible memory. Mark came over around 9:30. He'd been drinking, I could smell it the moment he walked in. He started demanding that I sign papers giving him access to Sophie's accounts. When I refused, she gestured to her bruised face, my hands stilled on the bandage I was applying. "He hit you in front of Sophie. Worse than that." Julia's voice dropped to barely audible. "Sophie tried to get between us. She rolled her wheelchair right up to him and told him to stop hurting Mommy. And Mark." He grabbed her chair and shook it, called her a useless little cripple who should mind her own business. The antiseptic wipe crumpled in my fist. The image of that monster shaking my niece's wheelchair, terrorizing a disabled child, made me want to put my fist through a wall. "That's when I called Mom," Julia continued, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. "I thought I hoped she'd help us. She was there in 15 minutes. And," Julia met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen before, complete disillusionment. She stood there and watched him hit me again, watched him grab Sophie's wheelchair and threaten to teach her some respect. And when I begged Mom to call the police, you know what she said. I waited, though every instinct told me I didn't want to hear this. She said, "Mark's right. You've been coddling that girl too long. Maybe it's time someone taught you both how the real world works." Julia's voice was flat now, emotionless. Then she turned to me and said, "Get out of my house. Take your crippled daughter and get out. You're not welcome here anymore." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of my heater and the distant sound of snow beginning to fall again outside. I stared at my sister, trying to process what she'd just told me. Our mother, the woman who'd raised us, who'd supposedly loved us, had stood by and watched her granddaughter be terrorized. "Julia," I said carefully, "whose house was this happening in?" "Mom's. I've been staying there since Mark and I started talking about getting back together. She said it would be good for Sophie to have family around." Julia laughed bitterly. "Turns out she meant a different kind of family." Sophie spoke up then, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mommy, should I tell Aunt Claire about the papers?" Julia's face went pale. "What papers, sweetheart?" Sophie held up the silver bracelet, and I realized she'd been using it to keep something wrapped inside a small, folded piece of paper. The ones Uncle Mark dropped when he was yelling. I picked them up. With trembling fingers, Julia unfolded the paper. As she read, her face went from pale to gray to something approaching green. What is it?" I asked. She handed me the paper without a word. It was a custody petition, already filled out and ready to be filed. Mark Holloway was seeking emergency custody of Sophie Bennett, claiming that Julia was mentally unstable and unfit to care for a disabled child. The petition cited evidence of neglect and failure to provide adequate supervision. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the page, in the section for supporting witnesses, was a signature I recognized: Linda Bennett. My mother had already signed on to testify against her own daughter. I looked up at Julia, then at Sophie, who was watching both of us with those two wise eyes. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. This wasn't just domestic violence. This wasn't just a custody dispute. This was a conspiracy, and our own mother was in on it. The custody papers felt like poison in my hands, but they'd also given me something I hadn't had before: a direction. I set them carefully on my coffee table and turned to Julia, who was still staring at them like they might burst into flames. "Julia, I need you to think carefully. When did Mark start asking about Sophie's benefits specifically, not just money in general, the disability payments?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of blood from a small cut. "About 4 months ago, right around the time he started being nicer, bringing flowers, talking about us being a family again. I thought he'd changed." Her laugh was bitter. "God, I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid. You were hopeful. There's a difference." I pulled my laptop from the side table. "But right now, I need you to be practical. Do you have access to your bank accounts? Can you log in and show me Sophie's benefit deposits?" Julia nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You think they've been stealing from her?" "I think we need to find out." I opened my laptop and handed it to her. "Show me everything." As Julia navigated to her online banking, Sophie rolled her wheelchair closer to us. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" "We're going to figure this out, sweetheart," I promised, though the dread pooling in my stomach suggested we were about to uncover something much worse than I'd imagined. Julia's fingers trembled as she logged into her checking account. The screen populated with transaction history, and immediately I could see the problem. Every month, like clockwork, there was a deposit labeled SSI Disability Benefit, Sophie Bennett, for $1,267, and every month, within 24 hours, there was an electronic transfer for the exact same amount to an account I didn't recognize. "Julia," my voice was carefully controlled. "What's this transfer?" She leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the account number. I don't know. Mark said he was helping me set up automatic savings for Sophie's future. He said it was going into a special account that would earn better interest." I clicked on the transfer details, noting the routing number and account name. The receiving account was listed under L. Bennett and M. Holloway, joint account. Linda Bennett, our mother. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, though I was already scrolling back through the transaction history. Since Mark and I started talking again. He said it was responsible financial planning." Julia's voice was getting smaller with each revelation. I scrolled back month after month, watching the same pattern repeat. $1,267 in, $1,267 out, for 6 months straight. Over $7,000 of Sophie's disability benefits. Gone. "Where did you think Sophie's therapy money was coming from?" I asked gently. "Mark said he was covering it temporarily, until we could access the savings account. He said there was paperwork we needed to file first." Julia buried her face in her hands. "Oh, God," Claire, they've been stealing from my disabled daughter for months, and I helped them do it. I pulled up a new browser tab and searched for the routing number. It belonged to Mountain Vista Credit Union, a small local bank that specialized in high-end services. Not the kind of place you'd put money for better interest rates, the kind of place you'd put money if you wanted it to be harder to trace. Julia, I need you to give me permission to look deeper into this. We need to see where that money actually went. She nodded immediately. Whatever you need, I just want to know how bad it is. I spent the next hour digging through financial records while Julia and Sophie dozed fitfully on my couch. Using my IT skills and some creative searching, I was able to piece together a picture that made my blood boil. The joint account wasn't just receiving Sophie's disability payments. It was actively being used for expenses that had nothing to do with her care. Luxury hotel stays in Vail, spa treatments, high-end restaurant charges, a deposit to Rocky Mountain home renovations for $8,000 work that had supposedly been done on Linda's house, though I'd been there recently and hadn't seen any renovations. But the most damning discovery came when I cross-referenced the dates. Every major withdrawal from the joint account corresponded with social media posts I found on Linda's Facebook page. Photos of her and Mark at expensive restaurants, smiling and toasting with champagne. Pictures from their weekend getaway to Aspen, staying at a resort that cost $400 a night. All funded with money stolen from a 9-year-old disabled girl. I took screenshots of everything, creating a digital trail of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic theft and fraud. But as I worked, Julia stirred on the couch and dropped another bombshell. Claire, she said quietly, there's something else. I found other papers in Mark's jacket pocket before we left. I was so scared I just grabbed them and ran. But she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. Inside were documents that made my worst fears look optimistic. The first was a guardianship petition Mark seeking legal guardianship over Sophie, claiming Julia was incompetent to manage the child's financial affairs. The second was a power of attorney document, already signed by Linda, giving Mark control over any inheritance or family assets in the event of Julia's incapacitation. The third document made me see red. It was a preliminary application for Sophie to be placed in a state care facility, claiming she was too difficult to manage in a home environment and that her mother was unable to provide adequate care. They weren't just stealing Sophie's money. They were planning to get rid of both Julia and Sophie entirely, keeping the benefits flowing while eliminating the inconvenience of actually caring for them. I looked up at Julia, who had read the horror in my expression. How bad is it? Bad, I said simply, but not unfixable. They made one crucial mistake. What's that? I gestured to my laptop screen, now filled with screenshots and financial records. They left a paper trail, and I just documented every single piece of it. For the first time since she'd collapsed on my doorstep, Julia smiled. It wasn't much of a smile, but it was there. So, what do we do now? I saved the last of the financial evidence and closed my laptop. Outside, dawn was beginning to creep across the Denver skyline, turning the snow-covered streets from black to gray to pale gold. Now, I said, we go to war. We didn't have to wait long for the war to come to us. At 7:15 that morning, just as I was making coffee and Julia was helping Sophie get cleaned up in my bathroom, there was another knock at my door. This one wasn't frantic. It was controlled, measured, confident. The knock of someone who believed they held all the cards. Through the peephole, I saw Mark Holloway standing on my doorstep like he owned the place. He'd cleaned himself up since last night, fresh shave, expensive suit, holding a bouquet of roses that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. The kind of roses you buy when you're trying to make a grand gesture, not when you're genuinely sorry. But what made my blood freeze was the black Cadillac parked across the street with Linda sitting in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on my front door like a hawk watching prey. Julia, I called quietly. They're here. I heard the bathroom door open, followed by the soft whir of Sophie's wheelchair. Julia appeared in the hallway. her face pale but determined. We'd spent the last hour planning for this moment, knowing it would come. I slipped my phone from my pocket and hit the voice recorder app before opening the door. If Mark wanted to play games, I was going to document every word. Claire. Mark's smile was blinding, all white teeth and fake warmth. Thank goodness you're okay. We've been so worried about Julia and Sophie. He stepped forward as if to enter my apartment, but I stayed firmly planted in the doorway. Worried about what? Exactly. Well, Julia's been having some episodes lately. Mental health issues, you know. Last night she got confused and took Sophie out in the middle of the night. We just want to make sure they're safe. His tone was perfectly reasonable, perfectly concerned. If I hadn't seen Julia's bruises with my own eyes, I might have believed him. Episodes. I kept my voice level. That's interesting, because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone beat the hell out of my sister. Mark's smile flickered for just a second. Claire, I understand you want to protect Julia, but you don't know the whole story. She's been struggling since the divorce. Sometimes she hurts herself, falls downstairs, walks into doors. It's heartbreaking, really. The audacity was breathtaking. He was standing there in his expensive suit, spinning a narrative where Julia's bruises were self-inflicted, where he was the concerned ex-husband just trying to help. And Sophie? I asked, does she fall downstairs too? Sophie needs professional care that Julia just can't provide anymore. We found an excellent facility. The one in the paperwork you had drawn up. I interrupted. The application to have her placed in state care. Mark's composure cracked slightly. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw the real man underneath the performance. I don't know what Julia's been telling you, but she's not in her right mind. That's why we need to get her help. Help, I repeated. Is that what you call stealing $7,000 from a disabled child? The mask fell completely now. Mark's face hardened, his stance shifted, and suddenly I was looking at the man who'd terrorized my sister and niece just hours before. You need to stay out of family business. Claire, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Julia and Sophie are coming home with me today. If you try to interfere, I'll have no choice but to call the police and report that you're holding a child against her legal guardian's wishes. I almost laughed. Legal guardian, last I checked. Julia still has full custody of her daughter. Not for long. Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. Emergency custody hearing, scheduled for tomorrow morning. Julia's been deemed mentally incompetent to care for Sophie. I've been appointed temporary guardian pending the outcome. My heart sank as I read the header. It was a court order signed by Judge Harrison Weber, appointing Mark as Sophie's temporary guardian, effective immediately. That's impossible, I said. Julia would have been notified. She was served at Linda's house this morning. Unfortunately, she wasn't there to receive the papers. Mark's smile was back, cold and triumphant. Since she's technically in violation of a court order by removing Sophie from my custody, I'm well within my rights to recover the child by any means necessary. Behind me, I heard Sophie's small voice. I don't want to go with him. Aunt Claire. Mark pushed past me into the apartment before I could stop him. Sophie, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. Come on, let's get you home where you belong. He reached for Sophie's wheelchair, but Julia stepped between them, her whole body shaking with rage and terror. Don't you touch her, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Don't you ever touch my daughter again. I'm her legal guardian now. Julia, you have no say in this anymore. Mark's hand closed around the handle of Sophie's wheelchair. That's when I made my move. Actually, Mark, I said loudly, making sure my phone's recorder caught every word. I think you should know that this entire conversation has been recorded, including the part where you just admitted to deliberately serving court papers when you knew Julia wouldn't be there to receive them. Also the part where you threatened to use any means necessary to take a disabled child from her mother. Mark froze, his hand still on Sophie's wheelchair. You're also being recorded admitting to having Julia declared mentally incompetent through what sounds like fraudulent means. I'm sure the court would be very interested to hear about that, along with the financial records I found showing you've been systematically stealing from Sophie's disability benefits. I held up my phone, making sure he could see the recording app was active. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. You're going to take your hands off my niece's wheelchair. You're going to walk out of my apartment. And you're going to wait for us to see you in court tomorrow, where we'll have plenty to discuss about your legal guardianship. Mark's face was purple with rage, but he could see the trap I'd laid. Every word out of his mouth was being recorded, every threat documented. He slowly removed his hand from Sophie's wheelchair. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But the next time we meet, it'll be in front of a judge, with evidence." He stormed out, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the frame. Through the window, I watched him stalk to the Cadillac where Linda was waiting. Even from a distance, I could see her fury at how badly he'd just screwed up. As the car drove away, Julia collapsed into a chair, shaking. "Claire, what are we going to do? He has a court order. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I said, saving the recording and immediately backing it up to 3 different cloud services. "We're going to destroy them." I looked down at Sophie, who was watching me with those brave blue eyes. "But first, we need to call a lawyer, a really good one." By 9:30 that morning, my dining table had been transformed into a war room. Printed bank statements covered every inch of surface, highlighted in different colors to track the stolen money. Screenshots of Linda's social media posts were arranged chronologically, showing exactly how Sophie's disability benefits had funded their luxury lifestyle. The custody documents Mark had dropped were spread out like evidence at a crime scene. But the real blow came when my mail arrived. Julia had been pacing my living room, checking the window every few minutes for signs of Mark's return, when I heard the mail slot rattle. Among the usual bills and junk mail was an envelope addressed to Julia Bennett, marked "Urgent Legal Notice." Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was an official summons for an emergency custody hearing scheduled for 10:30 the next morning, less than 24 hours away. "This is impossible," Julia whispered, reading the documents. "Look at the date this was filed. Claire, 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks. They've been planning this for almost a month. I took the papers from her trembling hands and read through them carefully. The petition painted a picture of Julia that was barely recognizable, a mentally unstable woman who neglected her disabled daughter, who was financially irresponsible, who posed a danger to Sophie's well-being. The supporting evidence listed was extensive. Medical records indicating repeated injuries consistent with neglect, financial records showing mismanagement of the child's benefits, witness statements from concerned family members, and photographic evidence of unsafe living conditions. "Julia," I said slowly, "this isn't just theft. This is a full-scale frame job." She stopped pacing and stared at me. "What do you mean?" "Look at the timeline. Mark started being nice to you 4 months ago." "Right. Started talking about getting back together, moving you into Mom's house." She nodded. "And that's when the money transfers started. But I bet that's also when other things started happening. Little things." "Did you start having more accidents falling down? Bumping into things?" Julia's face went pale. "How did you—" "Yes, I thought I was just stressed. Clumsy. Mark was always so concerned, always taking photos of my bruises to document my healing process for insurance purposes." "Insurance purposes," I repeated grimly. "Julia, he was documenting your injuries because he was the one causing them, building a case to prove you were unstable, self-harming." The full scope of their plan was becoming clear. Mark hadn't just wanted Sophie's money, he'd wanted to eliminate Julia entirely, get her declared unfit, take custody of Sophie, continue collecting the benefits while placing her in state care where she'd be someone else's problem. "We need help," I said, reaching for my laptop. "Professional help." I started searching for family law attorneys in Denver, but Julia grabbed my arm. Claire, I can't afford a lawyer. Mark cleaned out my savings months ago, and now I know where Sophie's money really went. I have maybe $300 to my name. Then we find someone who works pro bono. I kept searching, clicking through law firm websites, looking for someone who specialized in child custody cases and had a track record of fighting for the underdog. That's when I found her Diane Porter, a family law attorney whose website was filled with success stories about protecting children from abuse and keeping families together. Her bio mentioned extensive work with domestic violence cases and a commitment to taking on clients regardless of their ability to pay. More importantly, she had a quote on her homepage that gave me hope. Every child deserves an advocate who won't back down, especially when they're fighting the system itself. I called her office immediately. Porter Family Law, this is Janet, came a warm voice. Hi, I need to speak with Diane Porter about an emergency custody case. The hearing is tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, but Ms. Porter is booked solid today. Can this wait until... It's about a disabled child whose disability benefits are being stolen by her abusive stepfather, who's also trying to have her mother declared mentally incompetent so he can place the child in state care while keeping the money, I said in one breath. The hearing is at 10:30 tomorrow morning, and we have less than 24 hours to prepare. There was a pause. Hold, please. 2 minutes later, a different voice came on the line, crisp, professional, but with an underlying warmth that immediately put me at ease. This is Diane Porter. Tell me everything. For the next hour, I laid out the entire situation while Julia added details and Sophie colored quietly in the corner. Diane listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting that I email her specific documents. This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen, she said finally. The good news is that they've left enough evidence to hang themselves. The bad news is that Judge Weber has a reputation for taking emergency custody petitions very seriously. If Mark has convinced him that Sophie is in immediate danger, Weber will err on the side of caution. So, what are our chances? Julia asked. Honestly, without preparation. I'd say 40-60 against us. But with the evidence you've gathered and 24 hours to build a case... Diane paused. I think we can turn this around. But it's going to be a fight. We're ready to fight, I said immediately. Good, because here's what we're going to do. First, I'm filing counterpetitions today, fraud charges against Mark, a motion to freeze the joint account he's been using, and a request for an immediate investigation into Sophie's financial abuse. Second, we're going to expose every lie in his custody petition with documentation. She rattled off a list of documents we needed to gather, people we needed to contact, evidence we needed to organize. By the time we hung up, I had 3 pages of notes and a timeline that would keep us busy until well past midnight. There's one more thing, Diane had said before ending the call. Julia, I need you to be prepared for them to get nasty tomorrow. They're going to attack your character, your fitness as a mother, your mental stability. They're going to try to make you lose your temper in front of the judge. I can handle it, Julia said, though her voice shook slightly. I know you can, but I also know how hard it is to stay calm when someone is lying about your child. Just remember, every time they lie, we have evidence to prove it. Every time they attack you, we have facts to defend you. They're fighting with manipulation and fraud. We're fighting with truth. As we started gathering documents for Diane's review, my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen. I answered on speakerphone, hitting record again. Claire, honey. Linda's voice was sickeningly sweet. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Why don't you and Julia come over for dinner tonight? We can work all this out as a family. The same way you worked it out last night when you watched Mark terrorize a 9-year-old. I asked. The sweetness vanished from her voice. You have no idea what you're getting involved in. Claire, I've been protecting this family for years, and I won't let you destroy everything I've built. Drop this nonsense, or you'll regret it. Is that a threat? Mom, it's a promise. I can make things very difficult for you. Your job, your reputation, your life in this city. I have connections you don't even know about. Back down now, or I'll make sure you lose everything." I looked at Julia, who was staring at the phone in disbelief. Our mother, the woman who'd raised us, who'd supposedly loved us, was threatening to destroy my life for protecting her granddaughter. "Thanks for clarifying where you stand," I said calmly. "This recording will be very helpful in court tomorrow." I hung up and immediately saved the audio file, backing it up along with all the other evidence we'd gathered. "My God," Julia whispered. "She really meant it. All of it." "Yes, she did. But she also just made the biggest mistake of her life." I pulled up Diane's email and started attaching files. She just threatened a witness in a custody case, on a recorded line. That's not just evidence, that's a felony. As I hit send on the email to our lawyer, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began genuine hope. They'd been planning this for months, building their lies carefully, thinking they held all the cards, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing. The truth doesn't need to be planned. It just needs to be revealed. And tomorrow, we were going to reveal everything. Diane Porter arrived at my apartment at 6 that evening, carrying 2 large briefcases and the kind of focused energy that told me she'd been working on our case nonstop since our phone call. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with steel gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room as she entered. "Before we start," she said, setting her briefcases on my cleared dining table, "I need you both to understand something. Tomorrow isn't just about custody. What we've uncovered here is systematic financial fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy. We're not just fighting for Sophie, we're potentially sending people to prison." Julia gripped my hand tighter. "Good," she said, and I was surprised by the steel in her voice. Diane smiled grimly. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Now, let's talk strategy." She opened her first briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "I've spent the afternoon doing damage control. First, I filed an emergency motion to freeze the joint account where Sophie's money has been going. As of 4:30 this afternoon, Mark and Linda can't touch another penny." "You can do that?" I asked. "When there's evidence of ongoing fraud involving a minor's benefits." "Absolutely. I also filed counter-petitions charging Mark with financial fraud and Linda with conspiracy. The district attorney's office has already opened a preliminary investigation." Julia leaned forward. "What does that mean for tomorrow?" "It means we're not playing defense anymore. We're on offense." Diane pulled out a timeline she'd created, mapping out every financial transaction, every documented injury Julia had suffered, every piece of evidence we'd gathered. "Mark's strategy is to paint you as an unfit mother. Our strategy is to prove he's a criminal." She turned to a fresh page in her legal pad. "Julia, I need to prepare you for what's going to happen in that courtroom. Mark's attorney, and he's hired Richard Steinberg, who's expensive and ruthless, is going to attack everything about you. Your mental health, your parenting, your financial decisions. They're going to try to make you break down in front of the judge." "I won't let them," Julia said, though her voice wavered slightly. "Here's how we prevent that." Diane pulled out a stack of index cards. "We're going to practice. Every question they might ask, every accusation they might make. We're going to rehearse your responses until they're automatic. Short answers. Stick to facts. Never let them see you angry." For the next 3 hours, Diane grilled Julia mercilessly. She played the role of Steinberg, attacking Julia's character, questioning her competence, suggesting she was lying about the abuse. Again and again, Julia stumbled, getting defensive or emotional. Again and again, Diane coached her back to the facts. "Remember," Diane said during one break, "every time you get emotional, you're proving their point that you're unstable. Every time you stay calm and stick to facts, you're proving they're wrong." While they worked, I organized our evidence into what Diane called kill folders, collections of documents so damning that they would destroy any credibility Mark or Linda might have. Bank records showing the stolen money, photos from Linda's social media showing her luxury lifestyle funded by Sophie's benefits, the recorded conversations where Mark had threatened us and Linda had admitted to the conspiracy. At 9:45, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Don't answer it," Diane said immediately. "They're going to try to rattle you tonight. Anything they say will either be lies or threats, and we already have enough evidence of both." But the phone kept ringing. Then it stopped, and immediately started again. On the fourth call, Sophie looked up from her coloring book. "Aunt Claire, what if it's important against Diane's advice?" I answered, but I put it on speaker and hit record first. "Claire." The voice was unfamiliar male, older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "This is Detective Martinez with Denver PD. We need to speak with you about some serious allegations that have been made." My blood ran cold. Diane was shaking her head vigorously, mouthing, "Don't say anything." "I'm sorry, Detective, but it's late and I have an attorney present. Can this wait until—" "Ma'am, we have reports that you're currently harboring a child who's been removed from her legal guardian's custody. We need you to bring Sophie Bennett to the station immediately, or we'll have to come get her." Diane snatched the phone from my hand. "This is Diane Porter, attorney for the Bennett family." "Detective, can you please provide your badge number and the case number for this alleged violation?" There was a pause. "Ma'am, I don't have to—" "Actually, you do. Colorado law requires that any officer making demands regarding child custody provide proper identification and case documentation. Since you haven't done that, and since there are no active warrants for my clients, this conversation is over." She hung up immediately and turned to me. "That wasn't a real cop. How do you know? Real police don't call and demand you bring a child to the station at 10 at night without a warrant. That was Mark or one of his friends, trying to scare us into doing something stupid." She made a note on her legal pad. "We're adding attempted impersonation of a police officer to the charges." At 10:30, there was a real knock at my door, gentle, professional. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in a business suit holding official-looking documents. "That's a real process server," Diane said, checking her watch. "Right on schedule." The woman handed me papers with a polite smile. "Julia Bennett, you're being served with additional documentation for tomorrow's hearing." I took the papers and closed the door. Diane read through them quickly, her expression growing darker with each page. "What is it?" Julia asked. "They're escalating. Mark has filed additional charges claiming you've been coaching Sophie to lie about abuse, claiming you've been stealing her medication to feed a drug habit, claiming you've been prostituting yourself to pay bills." Diane's voice was flat, professional, but I could see the anger in her eyes. "It's all lies, but they're serious accusations." Julia went white. "Drug habit prostitution. How can they—" "Because they're desperate," I said suddenly, understanding flooding through me. "We froze their money. We exposed their fraud. They know they're losing, so they're throwing everything they can think of at the wall, hoping something sticks." Diane nodded. "Exactly. And that desperation is going to be their downfall, because every false accusation they make is another count of perjury, another piece of evidence that this whole thing is malicious prosecution." She gathered her papers and started packing her briefcases. "Get some sleep, both of you. Tomorrow is going to be a long day, but we're ready for them. We have the truth, we have evidence, and now we have them on record making false accusations." As she reached the door, she turned back to Julia. "Remember what we practiced. Short answers. Stick to facts. Never let them see you break. Can you do that?" Julia nodded, though she still looked terrified. "Good. Because tomorrow, we're not just getting Sophie back. Tomorrow, we're making sure Mark and Linda never hurt anyone else's family again." After Diane left, I found Julia sitting on my couch, holding Sophie while she slept. My sister was staring out the window at the Denver skyline, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared, Claire," she whispered. "What if they win? What if I lose her?" I sat beside them, wrapping my arms around both my sister and my niece. "They're not going to win," I said firmly, "because we have something they don't." "What's that?" I looked down at Sophie. sleeping peacefully despite everything that had happened, despite the trauma, despite the fear, despite having her whole world turned upside down. She still trusted us to keep her safe. "We have love," I said. "Real love. Not the kind they fake for court papers or custody hearings. The kind that makes you fight impossible odds to protect the people who matter most." Julia smiled through her tears. "Think that's enough?" I thought about the evidence we'd gathered, the allies we'd found, the truth we were about to reveal. I thought about Mark's arrogance and Linda's threats and their absolute certainty that they could steal from a disabled child without consequences. "Tomorrow," I said. "We're going to find out." The Denver Family Court building loomed gray and imposing in the morning light as we arrived at 9:45. Diane had insisted we get there early to settle in, but I could see Mark's black Mercedes already in the parking lot. They were ready for war, too. Sophie sat quietly in her wheelchair, wearing the blue dress that made her eyes sparkle Diane's suggestion to make her look as innocent and vulnerable as possible. Julia walked beside us, her posture rigid with nerves despite our hours of preparation. Every few steps, she'd touch the folder of evidence tucked under her arm like a talisman. "Remember," Diane murmured as we approached the courthouse steps, "they're going to try to provoke you. Stay calm. Stick to facts, and trust the evidence." Inside the courtroom, the battle lines were already drawn. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table with Richard Steinberg, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate law firm advertisement. Linda sat in the front row behind them, dressed like she was attending church conservative blue dress. Pearl necklace, the picture of respectable grandmotherly concern. The performance had already begun. Judge Harrison Weber entered at exactly 10:30, a stern-looking man in his 60s whose reputation for protecting children was legendary in Denver family courts. Diane had warned us that his no-nonsense approach could work for us or against us, depending on how well we presented our case. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the custody of Sophie Bennett," Judge Weber announced. "Mr. Steinberg, you may present your case." Steinberg rose with practiced grace. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a mother who, despite her love for her child, has become unable to provide the safe, stable environment that 9-year-old Sophie desperately needs." For the next 20 minutes, he painted Julia as a woman spiraling into mental illness and drug abuse, unable to manage Sophie's complex medical needs, financially irresponsible with her daughter's benefits. He presented Mark as the concerned stepfather trying to save both mother and child from a dangerous situation. "Your Honor," Steinberg concluded, "Mr. Holloway isn't seeking to separate this family permanently. He's seeking to provide immediate intervention before tragedy strikes." It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been convinced myself. Then it was Diane's turn. "Your Honor, what we have here isn't a case of parental unfitness. What we have here is a carefully orchestrated conspiracy to defraud a disabled child of her benefits while removing her from the only parent she's ever known." Diane moved to a projection screen that had been set up near the judge's bench. "I'd like to present evidence that tells a very different story than the one Mr. Steinberg just shared." The first image that appeared was a bank statement showing Sophie's monthly disability deposits. Every month for the past 6 months, $1,267 in disability benefits meant for Sophie's care has been deposited into Julia Bennett's account, and every month, within 24 hours, that exact amount has been transferred to a joint account controlled by Mr. Holloway and Mrs. Linda Bennett. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Steinberg's confident expression began to waver. "Where did that money go?" Diane clicked to the next slide screenshots from Linda's Facebook page showing expensive dinners, spa treatments, luxury hotel stays. It funded a lifestyle that had nothing to do with Sophie's care. Judge Weber leaned forward, studying the evidence with sharp eyes. "But that's not the worst part," Diane continued. She clicked again, and the screen showed the guardianship paperwork we'd found in Mark's jacket. "Mr. Holloway had already drawn up papers to place Sophie in state care while maintaining control of her benefits. This was never about Sophie's well-being. This was about money. Steinberg jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is speculation and overruled. Judge Weber said curtly. Continue, Ms. Porter. Diane's next slide was a timeline showing Julia's accidents and injuries, correlated with Mark's presence in their lives. The medical records Mr. Steinberg referenced as evidence of neglect tell a different story when viewed chronologically. Every injury corresponds with Mr. Holloway's visits. Julia Bennett wasn't neglecting her daughter, she was being systematically abused. The courtroom was dead silent now. Even Linda had stopped her performance of concerned grandmother, her face pale and tight. But don't take my word for it, Diane said. Let's hear from Mr. Holloway himself. She played the recording from my apartment, Mark's voice clear and threatening. You need to stay out of family business. Claire, if you try to interfere, I'll have no choice but to call the police and report that you're holding a child against her legal guardian's wishes. Judge Weber's expression darkened as the recording continued, capturing Mark's admission that he'd deliberately served papers when Julia wouldn't be there to receive them. And here's Mrs. Linda Bennett, Diane continued, playing the phone call where Linda had threatened to destroy my life if I didn't back down. The effect was devastating. Mark's face had gone from confident to ashen. Linda was staring at her hands, no longer able to maintain eye contact with anyone in the courtroom. But Steinberg wasn't finished. Your Honor, these recordings could have been taken out of context, manipulated. Are you suggesting my client fabricated police-quality audio recordings? Diane asked sweetly. I'm suggesting that desperate people do desperate things, including coaching a disabled child to lie about abuse. That's when Julia finally spoke. Sophie, she said quietly, can you tell the judge what Uncle Mark said to you the night we left Grandma's house? Sophie's small voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. He said I was a useless little cripple who should mind my own business. Then he shook my wheelchair and said he was going to teach me respect. The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Judge Weber's face was stone, but I could see the fury in his eyes. Steinberg made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, we have evidence that Ms. Bennett has been prostituting herself to support a drug habit. Enough! Judge Weber's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Steinberg, if you have one shred of evidence to support that accusation, present it now. Otherwise, you're dangerously close to a perjury charge. Steinberg opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing. Ms. Porter, Judge Weber continued, do you have anything else? Just one more thing. Your Honor. Diane's smile was razor sharp. Yesterday afternoon, Mr. Holloway or an associate impersonated a police officer in an attempt to intimidate my clients into surrendering Sophie illegally. We have that recorded as well. She played the fake police call, and Mark actually slumped in his chair. The game was over, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Weber didn't even call a recess. I've heard enough, he said. Emergency custody is denied. Sophie Bennett remains in the custody of her mother, Julia Bennett. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the financial fraud allegations, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. His gaze fixed on Mark with laser intensity. Mr. Holloway, you are hereby prohibited from any contact with Sophie Bennett or Julia Bennett. Mrs. Linda Bennett, your visitation rights are suspended pending investigation, and if anyone in this courtroom attempts to interfere with this family again, they will face the full weight of the law. The gavel came down like a gunshot. In the gallery behind us, I heard Linda's sharp intake of breath. When I turned, she was staring at us with pure hatred, her grandmother mask finally and completely fallen away. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, Steinberg approached Diane with the look of a man who knew his career had just taken a major hit. This isn't over, he said quietly. Diane smiled. Oh, yes it is. But the criminal trial? That's just beginning. We walked out of that courthouse into the crisp Denver morning air, feeling like we'd just survived a hurricane. Julia was crying, not from sadness, but from pure relief that had been building for months. Sophie held both our hands as we made our way to the parking lot, her wheelchair rolling smoothly over the cleared sidewalk. "Is it really over?" Julia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Diane, walking beside us with her briefcase full of evidence, shook her head. "The custody battle is over, but the real justice that's just getting started." She was right. Within 2 hours of leaving the courthouse, Diane called with an update that sent chills of satisfaction through me. "The district attorney's office just issued arrest warrants," she said. "Mark is being charged with fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, child endangerment, and impersonating a police officer. Linda is being charged as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy. They're also looking into RICO charges organized criminal activity." "RICO?" I asked. "Like the mafia. When multiple people conspire to systematically defraud government benefits, it can qualify. The DA thinks this might not be their first time doing something like this." That afternoon, as we sat in my living room trying to process everything that had happened, my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen one last time. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I put it on speaker and hit record old habits. "Claire." Linda's voice was different now, stripped of pretense, raw with desperation. "You have no idea what you've done. Mark has connections. People who can make your life very difficult. You need to drop these charges. Or what?" I interrupted. "You'll destroy my career, ruin my reputation, make me disappear." I laughed, surprising myself with how genuinely amused I sounded. "Mom, in case you missed it, you're about to be arrested for felony fraud. Your boyfriend is looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. Whatever connections you think you have, whatever threats you think you can make, they're all worthless now." There was silence on the other end. "You know what the best part is?" I continued. "Every word you just said was recorded. Again. And it's going straight to the prosecutor's office as evidence of witness intimidation. So thank you for one last piece of evidence to guarantee you both go to prison." I hung up and immediately forwarded the recording to Diane. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Linda Bennett arrested at Denver International Airport attempting to board flight to Mexico. Mark Holloway in custody. Both held without bail. You can rest easy tonight. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, Denver PD Financial Crimes Unit." Julia read the message over my shoulder and burst into tears all over again. "It's really over," she sobbed. "They can't hurt us anymore." Sophie looked up from her coloring book, where she'd been working on a picture of a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it, her, Julia, and me. "Mommy, does this mean we can stay with Aunt Claire?" Julia knelt beside Sophie's wheelchair, taking her small hands in hers. "We can stay anywhere we want, sweetheart. We're free." 6 months later, I received a call from Diane with the final update. "Mark pled guilty to all charges," she said. "He got 8 years, no parole for the first 4. Linda held out longer, but the evidence was overwhelming. She got 6 years and has to pay full restitution every penny they stole from Sophie, plus interest and penalties." "What about Sophie's money?" "All recovered, plus damages. Between the restitution and the lawsuit we filed against the bank for failing to flag suspicious transfers, Sophie's college fund is looking pretty healthy." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my apartment, which had become our apartment. Julia had found a new job at a nonprofit that helped disabled families navigate social services. Sophie was thriving in a new school that actually understood her needs. We'd become a different kind of family than I'd ever expected, but we'd become one nonetheless. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table sharing stories from our day, Sophie asked a question that made me smile. "Aunt Claire, are you glad they came to our door that night?" I thought about it for a moment, about the fear, the anger, the months of fighting, the stress of court battles and criminal trials. Then I looked at my sister, healthy and happy for the first time in years, and at my niece, safe and loved and secure. You know what? Sophie, I am. Because that night, we learned something important. What's that? That when bad people try to hurt the people you love, you don't have to be a victim. You can fight back. And sometimes, if you're brave enough and you have the truth on your side, you can win. Julia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We didn't just win, she said. We made sure they can never do this to another family. She was right. The investigation into Mark and Linda had uncovered 2 other families they'd targeted with similar schemes. Both families had been too frightened or too isolated to fight back. Our case had given prosecutors the evidence they needed to bring justice for them too. Sometimes I still think about that night, the frantic knocking at my door, the sight of my sister's bruised face, the moment I realized our own mother had betrayed us. It was the worst night of my life, but it was also the beginning of something better. Because that night, we learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. It's about who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. And it's about making sure that love, real love, always wins in the end. The people who tried to destroy us are in prison now, where they belong. And we're here, together, stronger than we ever were before. That's the best revenge of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice, family, and the power of fighting back against those who prey on the vulnerable. I hope Julia and Sophie's journey reminded you that even in our darkest moments, we have more strength than we know. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world and hear your thoughts on this story. If you enjoyed this tale of revenge and redemption, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about standing up to family betrayal. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon.